Welcome to my talk full of tips on how to have a fun and productive game jam with Unreal Engine. My name is Kyle Erf, and I've been programming professionally in Unreal Engine since 2019, and I can't wait to help you start your journey as well. This workshop has two main sections. The first, we're going to cover quickly setting up Unreal and how I personally approach a project when I'm trying to make a satisfying game in a very small amount of time. The second part of this video will focus on the most frequently asked questions by Unreal novices during game jams. So that's things like how to set up source control, importing assets, Quixel Megascans, lighting, and local multiplayer. Without further ado, let's dive in. So when setting up Unreal Engine for a game jam with a small team, the first thing you need to do is make sure you all have the engine and you're all running the same version. The easiest way to install Unreal Engine is through the Epic Games launcher. You can get that from Epic's website, or just type it into your favorite search engine. If you go to the Unreal Engine section and then here to library, you can install engine versions up at the top. For this talk, I'm going to be using 4.27. I won't be using 5. I know a lot of people are interested in 5, but it's still in beta. Sorry, guys. You're welcome to mess around with it, and most of what I tell you will probably work exactly the same way in 5, but it's just not what the industry has moved to yet, and even though it is super cool. But for this talk, I'm going to be using 4.27. So get that installed, and we'll launch it up. So this brings me to my first big point with making a cool game jam game with Unreal Engine, which is to start with a good template project. You'll see when you can create a new project, you get all these options. As cool as it would be to make a new Mandalorian-style live VFX thing, we're going to be making a game today. So if you click on Games and then click Next, you get a few templates to choose from. Now, this is really important because these are both the, in my opinion, best learning tool in Unreal and also the easiest way to get something off the ground quickly. So if you want to make a first-person shooter, the first-person template makes sense. Meanwhile, if you're interested in manipulating physics objects as your character, the rolling template is really good for that. Similarly, the third person, if you want to make a third person platformer or shooter, another great choice. Top down is really interesting because it allows you to click around and make this little character move. And that's great for if you want to make some sort of RTS or even puzzle game. Similarly, like vehicle and flying are great if that's what you're looking for. And they even have templates for side scroller, which I personally have not messed with too much, but probably a good starting point for that. So for the demo today, I'll be making a third person game. So I'm going to start with the third person template. This is where you can set up some additional parameters. For a game jam, I would say leave starter content on, so don't mess with that at all. And also use Blueprint because that's probably the easiest thing for people to pick up quickly in this short amount of time. Just give your project a nice little name like Game Jam. maybe name it something a little better than that. And click Create, and we are off to the races. So here we are with the third person game template. You can click play at any time and run around using the keyboard and mouse, WASD. You can make them jump, you can make them dance, you can make them go upstairs, and already you have a pretty good game. This already belies an important point with using Unreal as opposed to other game engines because you can get started quite quickly. Unreal has things like third-person character movement kind of already built into the engine, so it's very easy to get started using something like this. I'm going to cut in right here a little bit and just say this talk does not have the scope or time to explain how all the features of Unreal work or how to start programming in blueprints, how to start programming in C++. There's a million talks for that, and in fact I gave one at the Game Jam last year if you're interested in learning more Unreal, very, very basics, how to wire things up. But instead, I'd like to take this moment to speak on ways to make really cool stuff in Unreal Engine really quickly. So one thing that a lot of successful Game Jam games do, so you can start feeling satisfying right away, is rely on the more advanced systems of the engine to do the heavy lifting for you. So a big one of those would be physics. Sure, walking around as this little guy is fun enough, but it'd be even more fun if you could, say, kick a bunch of cubes around. So quickly, the way to turn on a physics for a static object in Unreal is to just select it and go check the Simulate Physics button. One of the things I love about Unreal is how easy it is to do that. Let me hit play. And now you can see the cube falls to the ground. And I can kind of push it around awkwardly. It's not moving as smoothly as you might want, but this cube has a pretty high mass, so maybe we mess with the density a little bit, because I bet it would be hard to push around a real cube like that if you were this man. So one thing we can do is go up here and scale it down, and we have a little cube. And now that's, you know, already we're having fun. And then, you know, what if we want to make it even more fun? Make a bunch of bricks. And then if you hold Alt and drag, you can drag out copies. I'm holding Alt. And you hit Control and select multiple things. And then you hit Alt again and you drag up. And you shimmy these over a little bit. And you drag up with Alt. And you shimmy these over a little bit. And then you select these all again because they're probably, well, let's see what happens. Yeah, they're good. And then you have a wall. And you can walk through the wall. And now your game is really fun. That's so much more fun than just walking around. So if you wanted to make a game about smashing through brick walls and throwing bricks around, what a great thing to do. And actually, just as an exercise, I'm going to quickly throw together a game, fast forward through the production of it, and then go back and tell you some key things of a game jam game made in like 20 minutes, using these easy to access Unreal systems. So I think that'll be fun. Let's check that out. Okay, we're here in the future, and I've been working on my own little game jam project for the last dozen minutes or so, called Mr. Bricks. This is a game about a guy who has psychic powers over bricks, and he wants to put them in a goal as fast as he can. The way the game works is you possess this guy. You can press E to shoot bricks forward that are near you. You know, if you're not near bricks, it doesn't shoot the bricks, but you can go and you can push these bricks around using your psychic powers, or you could just run into them if that's your style. And your goal is to get them into this goal over here, this box with this dumb texture on it. And you boop, and when the bricks hit it, they explode in beautiful fireworks. And if you wanted to get fancy, you could add, you know, score and tabulation. And obviously this is silly and dumb, but this is actually a lot more fun than actual game jam games I've made, and I made it in like a few minutes. So games that abuse like physics, abuse is the wrong word. Games that take advantage of physics are great for this kind of thing. Whee! I mean, you can do it too much, and the thing with Unreal Physics is like a lot of these games can feel kind of similar, and a good way to mess with that is to change, you know, the physics properties of a map. I won't go into that, but yeah, that's a great way to get started. And again, this third-person character. Let me show you how this all works. Oh my gosh! So all I did is I made it so when you use this input action called brick powers, and I'll get to that in a second, it takes all of the static mesh actors, which is what these little boxes are. It takes all the static mesh actors and gets them and adds an impulse. An impulse is basically a force that happens instantly. And it determines what force that is by taking the direction of the player camera. So that's sort of our forward vector. And then we multiply that by this arbitrary number that I made, which in this case is 50,000. And it applies that to the brick, and the brick shoots off using physics. Quick note on that impulse force, Unreal Engine uses centimeters as its base units. So a lot of things around force or area, anything where you're multiplying distances, can be very, very, very large numbers. So that's just a little thing to look out for. This input action, brick powers, this is an important configuration thing. A lot of times when you're making a game, you want to add a new kind of way to interact with it using a controller or keyboard. So you can see these inputs come by default in the third-person character. So we have things for turning, jumping, touching with a touchpad, some VR stuff that we're not going to touch today. The way you mess with those is you go to Edit, Project Settings, and then go to this tiny, tiny thing here that says Input. And you get this set of action mappings. You can see these are already configured for us. We have one for jump and space bar and a few other things. So all I did here was click Add, and I created one for brick powers, and I set it to be E. So you can go through here and like select keyboard events or controller events. And this is a way of, you know, keeping all of your input bindings sort of separate from the gameplay. You can also bind things to specific characters and stuff, specific like keyboard characters and stuff in blueprints, but I advise you not to do that because it makes it hard to configure later. So this is the way to do that in Unreal. Again, controllers and stuff all works here too. So this is project settings, engine, input. The remaining bit of logic that I'd like to explain is how I got those explosions to come out at the end. So I created a new blueprint actor called BP Goal. This is in the blueprints folder within third person BP. And in blueprint goal, double click on that. All it's doing is it's set to overlap things here in the collision settings. And then on actor begin overlap, it casts a static mesh actor, sees if that's basically checking, is this actor I'm overlapping with a static mesh actor? And if so, grab its location, spawn an explosion, and then destroy the actor. That's basically all this game is, and it's already, you know, it's stupid, but it's actually kind of fun to mess with. So I encourage you to take advantage of these existing systems. Before I get into the FAQ section of this workshop, I do want to leave you with what is probably the most important piece of advice for learning things in Unreal Engine, which is Google it. And Google it by typing UE4 before your question. So type UE4, the thing I want to learn. And there's so many people who've had the same problem. There's so many tutorials out there. That's basically what I do all day for my job as a professional Unreal Engine developer. So let's say like you want to know like how to get overlapping physics objects or something. You know, you can type, pull up the browser here, UE for overlapping physics objects, and you have all these questions related to that. Obviously, we did all that very quickly, and I don't expect you to have followed everything I did quite exactly. This is really more meant to be an example to show you how to ideate and rapidly iterate in a game jam setting and take advantage of things like physics and character movement to do that quickly. There are, however, very common questions outside of what I just talked about that teams using Unreal tend to have in game jams. So I'm going to go over those frequently asked questions right now. So another big thing that people encounter issues with when getting started with Unreal is importing and managing assets. So just for now, I'm going to quickly drag myself up here into the center so we can see the lovely content browser down below. Okay, stupid. All right, so this is the content browser. It holds all the content. If you use Unreal, you'll be down here a lot. First things first, always make sure to expand the sources panel because it gives you a nice tree view of your folders. No one knows why that's not on by default. So this is not good file structure, but I'm just going to show you very quickly how to import certain kinds of assets like textures, models, sounds. So let's say, you know, I want a new material on this goal. Like let's say I made a cool material as a texture. You can go import to game assets. Let me quickly open this up, and you can just select the image you want. And Unreal figures it out. It imports it as a texture. As a nice little plus, if you try and apply that texture to something, it'll automatically turn it into a material. Sometimes if you apply it to, if we apply it there, it'll automatically turn into a material, which is not really what we want. Oof. You can see you can right click, create a material from there, and it generates a material that you can just apply to things. Not necessarily the best workflow if you were doing this in a real development situation, but for a game jam, it's pretty nice. So you can just go into the actor you want to modify, and we can go to cube. We can now just select this texture goal mat. Wow, look at that. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So we compile and save that thing, and boom. Now this goal has a nice texture. But what if we want like an interesting sound to play when the bricks hit the goal? Well, through a similar process, you can just import a sound. So that was an OGG file. Wave's also great. This is the Wilhelm scream, which I believe is public domain and is no longer copyrightable. So I'm going to use it in this talk so I don't get sued. You might have heard that in a million films. So let's be really obnoxious and let's change it. So when the bricks hit this thing, we also play a sound. So play sound at location. We can take the same actor location, add that there, and then just select. Wilhelm has one L. That's an important thing here. You can also mess with the volume here because it tends to be a little loud. Let's just lower that. And again, there's lots of ways of configuring materials in Unreal. There's lots of ways of configuring sounds in Unreal. But for a game jam, just dragging it in and then dragging that file into like play sound at location is all you really need to do. So let's see how that stuff looks. That was so loud. So it worked. Very cool. Finally, if you are lucky enough to have a modeler on your team, first of all, tell them thank you because that's a very good thing they're doing. You can import models into Unreal from pretty much any editor. This is not my area of expertise, but people, as my understanding is, tend to import things as .fbx files. So I have a sample one here. You have a ton of import options. One thing to be aware of if you're importing from, say, Blender is not every 3D editor agrees on what direction forward is. Like not all the axes are the same. Unreal, to my knowledge, tries and handles that as best it can if you leave this convert scene box checked. But, you know, honestly, what I prefer to do is just click import and see what happens. And we can already see it is imported this lovely teapot for us here. And we just drag it in the editor, and that's our custom mesh. It's tiny, so we can go to the scale tool and just scale that bad boy up. And look at that. Years of computer graphics research in the palm of our hand. You can run around it. You can try and jump over it. There you go. If we even want, I think we could probably give it physics. Maybe not. Forget I tried that. We probably need to set up collisions for it or something in order to do that. But there you go. So that's like the stuff you made that you can add. The other thing that's a really fantastic resource for Unreal is the free Megascan library, which is a set of assets that are made from photogrammetry data of various objects that is due to the magic of corporate consolidation. When Unreal bought Quixel, you can use them for free in any Unreal project, which is really, really cool. So we're going to very quickly walk through how to set up Megascans and import them into your Unreal project, because to me, that's a fantastic way of making your game look polished and significant in such a tiny amount of time. So in the interest of time, I'm going to cut through this kind of jumpily, but this is how you set up Quixel Megascans in Unreal Engine. The first thing you want to do is go to quixel.com/bridge, click Download Bridge, and then click Save File. So we just wait for a moment for that to download. Imagine downloading an entire bridge, like the Brooklyn Bridge. That would be crazy. So you can start running the installer once it's downloaded. Probably you've done that before if you have used Windows. Next, you need to set up a library path. For now, I'm just going to leave this as is because I'll probably clean it up later. But I implore you to put it someplace you don't mind filling up. If you have like a secondary hard drive, that's a good spot. Very important, you want to set the correct export target, which handily is defaulting to Unreal Engine, but there are others if you have different workflows. Although in that case, probably not free to use. So now we download that export target plugin, which takes another bit of waiting. That's when you go get coffee. It finished. Okay. So this is where you go. Another thing, you need to set the proper engine version and it'll automatically install, which is really cool. This is the annoying part. You have to set the plugin location. If you installed from the Epic launcher, you're going to want to go to C, Program Files, Epic Games, and then the version of the launcher you have, and then Engine Plugins. And that's the folder it's looking for. Default project, and just leave that blank for now. And just click Install Plugin. Oh, it installed. That's great. We're done. So the next thing you're going to want to do is sign in with your Epic Games account so you can reap the benefits of your free usage of the Quixel library. I'll fill this in another screen so as to not give you all my detail. And now it is signing me in, and we are in. So let's open up our project once more. And we can see there's a very fun new button up here for us. You just click Megascans. You actually don't need to mess with any of this stuff right now. These are for setting defaults if you know what you're doing a little more on the technical art side of thing. But the handy thing is this is like magic to me, honestly, is you can go into the bridge and you can search for, like, I want a mountain, some mountain stuff. These beautiful rocks. So we can set a resolution. I'm just picking 4K because 8K seems excessive, and we download it. And it takes a moment. And then it processes. And then all we have to do is just click export. And it automatically takes control of the Unreal Editor, brings all this stuff in, creates a Megascans folder in the root of the content directory, which, let me show you that over here. So you can go to 3D assets, and we can check out this Nordic beach thing. We can actually just drag this in. And, that's pretty small for a Nordic beach, so we can go to the scale tool and scale it up. And hit play. And, oh, look how beautiful and realistic that is. Games are super realistic. They have great rocks now, and that's just because they're stealing real rocks and putting them in the video game. So this is the one bummer that you might hit with this kind of Quixel import, is that there's no collision by default, or at least there's no collision for your character by default. The way that you fix that is by generating collisions for the mesh. So what I'm going to do here is double click on this file. Boom. Let me slide. Whoa, I'm sliding. Okay, I'm sliding over here. And then just, you could spend all day learning about how collisions work in Unreal, but what I would do is just click like add 26 DOP simplified collision. It'll build a rough collision, simplified collision for this rock. Hit save. And now when you hit play, your guy's like, I can't go there. But you can jump on it, and you can kind of float above it. And there's ways around that by, you could substitute the complex collision in, which would be more expensive. But yeah, this is a way of adding collision to these objects. So in the interest of fun, I'm actually curious, can you add physics to this? Yes, you can. Nice. So just as a little laugh, I've actually gone into Quixel and found some nice high-quality photo scans of bricks, which I can now use extremely realistic, free to use bricks in Mr. Bricks, my very cool Game Jam game. Look at that. Still too loud. Anyway, that's Quixel Megascans. Highly recommend if you're doing anything somewhat realistic in terms of graphics for your Game Jam project. Okay, next up, a thing that a lot of folks run into problems or questions with is how lighting works in Unreal. And I think this is a common problem because it can be a little unintuitive what the defaults are and how to use them. So I'm just going to go with a quick overview of how lighting works in Unreal, especially in these starter projects. So actually, if you go into the world outliner up in the corner here and you just search for light, you'll see this lighting folder. We have several different lights already in this map. So we have light source. This is basically the stand-in for the sun in these starter projects. You can see it's even got a sun icon on it. And this is the directional light that casts shadows, right? So, you can bloop, bloop, bloop around. You can change the angle of it with the rotation tool. You can change the color, which is a thing a lot of people want to do and have trouble finding. It's figuring out like the how to set colors, because that's a huge indicator of mood. And I, of course, always want it to be a little bit brighter. So this intensity value, I feel like that looks actually quite a bit nicer as a default. Great, so that's the directional light. There's also the skylight, which is more of a universal lighting that's meant to mimic what being outside actually is like. There's a lot of cool physically based rendering stuff going on here that I don't fully understand. But basically, if you don't have a skylight, your shadows become very dark because they are not lit ambiently. So once again, you can kind of mess with the color a bit. It's much more subtle, but if you want to change the color a lot, use the light source. If you want to mess with like smaller changes, mess with the skylight. And then of course there's lights you can add in your own scene. So there's point lights, which are, I think, pretty understandable what these might do. Again, you can change the intensity of them as well as the color. And the attenuation radius, which basically determines like how far away they can affect things. And then the other main kind of light that you'll use is the spotlight, which again, I think beautifully named because most people can figure out what it does. Just go over here, drag it around. It's a light you can angle. It projects like a spotlight. It's named after a real thing, which makes it a lot easier to understand. Look at that. Look at that beautiful, look at that beautiful scan. It's perfect. So those are lights. There's one huge thing that I do want to point out. You can actually already see it here. In these shadows, you see the word preview. This is based on the idea of baked lighting, which is how Unreal handles lighting by default. Baked lighting does a full calculation of all the lighting in the scene and sort of literally bakes it, like cooks it into the level. And the reason you would do that is for unmoving level geometry, it is a lot faster to render during game time at the expense of having to do this baking step and take up a huge amount of disk space in your packaged published game. There's a big move away from this kind of lighting for several reasons, but I will tell you this, I don't believe Fortnite uses this anymore. They just do fully dynamic lighting. And you can see there's some weird behavior you'll get. Like if I move this box here, there's actually this weird shadow that's just left on the ground, and that's from when the lighting was baked. So if you do want to bake lighting, you can go to build lighting only, or just click this build button up top. It takes a while. Even for this small scene, it could take a while just to start running. So what I typically advise people to do for game jams is just turn it off. Just be like Fortnite. Just get rid of baked lighting. Computers and the lighting system in Unreal tend to be fast enough to handle it, and it makes you less beholden to the decisions you made designing a level, because lights can just be fully dynamic. So the way you do that is you go to, well, I usually find it by searching, but if you go to project settings, again from edit, project settings, and you type static light. Okay, it's under engine, rendering, lighting, allow static lighting. Just click that bad boy off, and then it's going to ask you to restart your editor, and let's do it. Oh, and let's save all those work in progress files that we haven't quite saved yet. It's back up. It's got to recompile some shaders because the whole lighting model of the game has changed. Could take a few minutes, but I do think it's worth it in what it gets you. Finally, a big game jam specific problem that people do run into is setting up multiplayer, specifically local multiplayer. So multiple people playing at the same computer, at the same TV, whatever. Unreal Engine actually has great internet multiplayer stuff, but that is so far beyond the concept of what we could talk about in this short talk today. So that's up to you to figure out how to do. But for local multiplayer, because that's such a common thing for game jam games, I figured it's worth going into. So there's actually a very easy way to test multiple players in the editor. So if you want your game to do like split screen or whatever, that's actually enabled by default. And the way you test it is using the Unreal console, which is the tilde key, the squiggly key in the upper left of your keyboard. Let me move myself to the middle here. So type debug create player 1. Whoa. And so it'll automatically create a new player pawn at the player start in the level, which just happens to be over here. So that character is there. And if you want to control them, there's a few things you can set up. You can set them up in the properties, which I'll get to in a second, to use a controller while the main character uses a keyboard for testing. Or you can swap between these sides of the screen with SS swap controllers. Swap controllers. Hit enter, and now you control this bottom guy, and he's got all the same bindings as the main character. And so now you've taken a pretty silly illustrative tech demo of throwing these bricks around, and now you just add a couple scoreboards, and you've got yourself a really intense multiplayer sensation. Of course, you don't have to use split screen. A lot of people want to have multiple players control things where there's just one camera. And I'll show you real quick how to disable split screen. It's under project settings, I just search for split screen, but it's under project dash maps and modes. So over here, if you go to local multiplayer, just uncheck use split screen, and that'll allow you to add players without breaking up the window at all. So now we hit play, and we do the same debug create player one. So I just hit tilde to open the console, and I hit up just now to go through history. But if you want to type the whole thing again, you can. And it's created this guy over here. So by default, it's going to keep using the camera on player one. But just to show you that it is another player, I can still swap controllers and run around. Again, not using this character's camera. But let's see if I can pilot him. Yeah, that's great. Very good. So you kind of have to rewrite your game logic to account for just using one camera. For instance, if I really wanted the game to work this way, I would decouple the camera from the first player and just kind of have it floating above the level or something like that. So you have to get more creative that way. But in terms of broad strokes of setting things up, that is how you do it, and that is a very common thing for game jams, for setting up couch co-op, couch PvP, couch anything, man. So version control is probably the number one thing people have questions about. How do I share code with my team in Unreal Engine? This is a really important topic. I would say like 30% of teams that fall apart in game jam situations fall apart due to bad handling of version control. That's a statistic I completely made up, but it feels true, and I'm sticking by it. So if you don't want to be like them, listen up. There's a few different ways to do version control in Unreal. Basically, any of the mainstream version control systems work for it. So if you have something like Perforce or Subversion available to you, that's a great option. There's a free trial for this thing called Plastic SCM, which is really good for reasons I don't totally have time to get into, but if you're a bit of a version control junkie, that might be worth checking out. But of course, the most common thing people use for small one-off projects like this is GitHub. And Unreal Engine does support Git. There are a few caveats as opposed to the other version control systems that I'll highlight in a little bit. But for now, I'm just going to walk you through setting up a Git repository with your team in GitHub. This doesn't have time to be a full Git tutorial, unfortunately, but I am going to highlight things like setting up your git ignore, making sure you're copying over the right files, etc., etc. So when it comes to setting up a GitHub repository for Unreal, the most important thing is checking add git ignore and then selecting Unreal Engine. This will automatically configure blocking certain files like your intermediates and binaries from being uploaded. So I'm just going to create that. I'm going to create private so it doesn't mess up my beautiful public profile. If you look at the git ignore, you get to see some of these folders down here. So it's like ignoring certain save data, intermediate build files, derived data cache, binaries. So it's trying to avoid uploading the big, huge things that are produced, the big, huge artifacts that are produced as part of the Unreal export process, which is handy. And we'll go into that in a second once I have Git set up. All right, so we've successfully cloned our empty repository to our file system. Again, I don't have a full amount of time to go into how to use Git, but just clone it whichever way you're most comfortable with. So I've created this GGJ thing. It just has a git ignore in it, and what we need to do is copy the contents of our project into this directory. Okay, here we go, git add dot. And this is why a lot of people don't use the shell. So this will take a second, so I'll take a sip of my coffee. And we're gonna get to the important thing here. So if we do git status, we can see all the things that are getting added, and notice it's basically only the content folder gets pushed in cases like this, and the config folder. So all of these other folders, I wish you could see a little better. I guess that's slightly zoomed in. So things like intermediate and saved and script, like these don't get included. Intermediate and saved, and if there were one, binary would not get included as per the get ignore, because those files can all be generated while you're building using these config and content and source files. So anyway, I'm just gonna push that. All right, and now that everything's uploaded, we can see only the config and content folders are used here, along with the U project. Everything else can be generated through the editor or through exporting the game. One really important note about working with Git as opposed to the other version control systems for Unreal is that Git does do really brilliant merging for by default for like text files. So if you're writing C++ or if you're changing these configuration files, it can merge those pretty seamlessly. But Unreal uses binary files for most of its assets. So if you're editing a character, you're editing blueprints, or you're editing a map, those are binaries and cannot be automatically merged by Git. So you can very easily run into a situation if two people are working on the same map or the same character. Those changes can conflict and they aren't really resolvable. One has to overwrite the other. So if you're using Git, which shouldn't be too hard to do for a game jam project, you need to be in communication about who's messing with what at a given moment. So if you need to edit a character, you kind of got to get a soft lock on that. There's ways around that, and there's all sorts of creative solutions people have come up with. But by default, it's something you need to contend with. And just fair warning, because it's definitely bitten me a few times. So that's about it for today. I hope you found at least a few useful tidbits there to help you and your team with this journey of learning Unreal through making a sick game jam game. My name again is Kyle Erf. If you have any further questions, you can find me either on Twitter or on the Playcrafting Discord. Thanks for listening, and I can't wait to see what games you come up with.